So I've been working on making this podcast for a while. It's called Knowledgeable Provider, all about medical stuff that I work on from day to day. Find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere else you can find a podcast. But I'm enjoying the technical challenge of just learning how to edit and make decent audio and now video files. And I like using ReaFir, and I thought I would share some tips, tricks that I've learned that have helped me speed up my process of editing. The first one is project templates or templates. So instead of just starting from a blank ReaPer project, you can kind of preload the things that you would want. In my case, that is the disclaimer at the beginning of my podcast, the intro music, all my little transition sounds, and then the outro music. And now that I'm going to try to do video, the images that I would use at the beginning and the end. So I've got this set up and I want to save it as a template. So I'm just going to go up here to Project Templates, Save Project as Template. And I'm just going to call this. Okay, so now if I want to start a new project, I go to Project Templates. There's my template. Of course, it'll ask us if we want to save the new project, which I'm not going to do for this demonstration. But there you go. There's all the things that I need to record a new episode, so I can just move the cursor where I want it and take off. When I first started, I was trying to build every episode from scratch by putting in the parts, and obviously that takes forever. So the template, very time-saving. The next thing is noise reduction. I'm just going to open a totally new track here. So it's a challenge to get audio that is free of background noise, right? Try to make it as quiet in the house here as possible. Obviously, I don't have a real recording studio or a treated room or anything like that. So I try to do the best I can with the environment I have. ReaPer has a really cool feature in it that I found very useful for filtering out background noise. It's called ReaFir. So if you look in the effects list, it's right here, ReaFir. And the way you use it is it has a preset for noise reduction. And so what you want to do is get a sample of what the background noise is. So in this case, I'm just going to do it live for the track I would be about to make right now. So let me arm my track. So you can see, just looking at the waveform here, even when it's totally quiet, there's a baseline level of background noise. So right now, maybe the air conditioner's running. There's a couple of ceiling fans running in here. Of course, the computer's running. So that's just the baseline noise that creates. You can use this tool to filter that out after you have made your recording by just selecting some silence and using it the same way. But I found that it's much more useful to do it beforehand, and then you don't even record the background noise in the first place. So all you have to do is choose the preset and then click Automatically Build Noise Profile. And it just builds a filter right there. So in order to use it on the way in, instead of doing it in post, where you want to put it is actually on the Input Effects tab. And you find that right here in Effects. So you just do the same process, add the ReaFir, generate the noise profile. So now anything that we record onto this track is going to have this background noise just filtered out, and it's never even going to be recorded on there in the first place. I like to look at the waveform and listen just to make sure that I'm not creating something that's going to filter out any of my voice, which typically the background noise is way down here in this low frequency area and it's not super loud. So generally you don't have to worry about that. I use a high pass filter on the final vocal track that is set at about 100 anyway. So far that hasn't been an issue at all. But I just like to look just to make sure, because the thing about using it on the input effects is that there are no do-overs, right? Whatever it filters out is not going to be recorded at all, so it won't be there later. I guess that would be the one advantage of using that in post after you've already recorded it, is that you're not going to lose anything. But so far it hasn't been a problem at all, and it's definitely saved me a step in post-production. The next tool I want to show you is the auto trim split function. This has been an absolute game changer for me. I don't really write a script for my podcast episodes. Usually I'll make an outline of generally what I want to say. Although now that I've been doing it for a while, almost a year now, I kind of just start talking and I'll pause after each phrase and kind of think about what I want to say next and then say it. So what I end up with is big gaps in between the phrases that I'm saying. And what I need to do is pull those phrases all together so it sounds like I'm speaking continuously. And when I first started, of course, I was just doing it manually splitting each one, pulling it together. But it turns out there's a tool that will do that for me. So let me just record a little example track here, and I'll show you what I'm doing. So in the past, I would literally just go in here, manually split this, and put it together like that. But it turns out ReaFir has a tool that will do that for you. It's called Auto Trim Split. So in the action list, it would be right here, Auto Trim Split Items, parentheses, remove silence. I created a keyboard shortcut, Control A. So you just click on the piece of audio you want it to process, select that from the action list or use your shortcut. I started with some settings that were suggested by probably Kenny Joya. That's generally how I learn about ReaFir, is by watching his videos. And I just sort of tweaked it a little bit. So you set the threshold that you want it to consider silence. You give it a little margin of error on either side here. You tell it how short you want it to make the clips, how much silence you want it to ignore. The big thing for me to get adjusted has been the leading pad and trailing pad. So it's going to do what I just did manually, automatically, right? It's going to split in between the phrases and then totally get rid of the silence and smush them all together. So in order for it to sound like a human talking, you don't want them really, really close together. You don't want them too far apart either. So these are what I've had to play with a little bit, is the leading pad and trailing pad. And I like to do the fades also, just so it doesn't sound as abrupt. Although now that I figured out how to filter out background noise, you don't really hear those abrupt changes between actual silence and background noise. So I want to split and remove silent areas. If you're doing this with multiple tracks, so if you have an interview, in my case, where there's two different vocal tracks, you want to preserve timing of non-silent areas, and that'll make sure that that'll leave the phrases where they are, so that it doesn't mess up the timing of you speaking with somebody else. But in this case, when I want to just smush it all together and make one track, I don't want to preserve the timing. So now I'm going to process it. Look at that, right there together. So now we can hear. So this is an example of how I might record a podcast episode. Typically, I think about what I'm going to say. Maybe I have to look something up on the computer. Maybe I don't like how I just said a phrase. How about that? Cool stuff, huh? Once I got that to work, that drastically cut the amount of time that I had to spend editing. The other thing that really drastically cut the amount of time I had to spend editing was ripple editing. It's hiding in plain sight right here, this little button up here. And what it does is automatically move everything behind the bit of track that you're working on. So let's say I have two different tracks here that I'm working on. Maybe here's one part of an interview, here's the next part of an interview. So without that ripple on, if I pick a section to work on, I can pick it up and move it around, and it only affects that one section, right? If I turn the ripple on, now if I move this one section, everything to the right of it is going to move with it. So that's pretty cool if you are just editing one track. If you're editing something that has multiple tracks, where you have, an hour of interview, that if you move one piece of the audio, it's going to screw up the alignment of the whole thing, you can hit the ripple button a second time, and now it affects all of the other items on the other tracks. So now if I was to move this back, it moves the one down here along with it. And again, that's something that I was doing manually for quite a while. I would actually make whatever move I was going to make, then zoom out, manually select everything behind it, move it around, get it back in alignment. It took hours and hours and hours to make those episodes doing that way. Now that I figured out the ripple, I don't ever have to worry about them getting out of line. One thing that I do run into is I forget to turn it off when I need to turn it off. Like, sometimes you actually want to pick this section up and move it over here without affecting anything else. And so if you forget and leave the ripple on, then obviously that's going to cause an issue. Or another thing that I've run into is if it's on for just one track and you need to keep multiple tracks in alignment, if you accidentally move something, that's going to throw everything out of line also. So have to be really careful about turning that on and off when you need it and don't need it. The keyboard shortcut for that is Alt-P. So you hit the Alt-P once, it turns it on for a single track, Alt-P twice for all the tracks, Alt-P a third time, turns it off. The next thing that's been helpful is saving my effects as a chain, so I just have them available. Of course, using the template, let's just load that up. So if I'm using the template, I can already have my effects chain ready to go. If I need to add it on to a new track, I just have it saved in here under podcast, I think. So now it just puts in all the effects that I use, and I don't have to go putting individual ones in there one by one. If you want to save an effects chain, you put in all the effects you would want, right click in here, and then FX chains, save all FX as chain, and then it'll ask you what you want to call it. I'll go through the effects that I actually use on my vocal processing in case you want to see that. This is one that has been a bit of a game changer as well. It's an automated one. It's from Isotope called ReaFir Assistant. And you can see the things that it does, right? It has noise reduction or denoise in the middle. It's got a de-esser built in, declick, declip, and de-reverb. And then it has kind of presets up here for whether you're doing music, percussion, whatever, or voice. And I'll show you how this works. So I have my track here, whatever I'm working on. In this case, it would just be a vocal track. And what the Isotope ReaFir Assistant does is use AI to actually, quote unquote, listen to the audio and make a suggestion about what to do to it. And it lays it out in that nice format there. It's very user-friendly, and in my experience so far, it's actually been very effective. I kind of like learning how to do things manually, but it's Also really nice to have that automated thing you can just click on and be done with it in a much shorter amount of time. All right, so I'll show you how this works. I'm going to find it under the effects. You actually have the option to use the individual pieces on their own, so you can do the declick, declip, dehum, dereverb just as single plugins. I like using them all together in the Repair Assistant. So now we make sure the effects are turned on, make sure this one's selected, and we put it in learn mode, and then we play the audio. So I have my track here, whatever I'm working on. In this case, it would just be a vocal track. And what the Isotope Repair Assistant does is use AI to actually, quote unquote, listen. And so we get its suggestion about what to do with it. So it set the denoiser, de-reverb, de-es, declick, declip. You can tell which ones are actually turned on and turned off. So in this case, the only thing it's recommending is the denoise and the declick. In my experience, it tends to be a little bit conservative. I usually end up wanting to turn these parts up. I always turn on the de-esser. And usually I'll do the reverb if I hear a lot of reverb, but I'll go ahead and click it on. And so now you should be able to hear the difference. So here's with it bypassed. So I have my track here, whatever I'm working on. In this case, it would just be a vocal track. And now with it turned on. So I have my track here, whatever I'm working on. In this case, it would just be a vocal track. That's been a very cool tool that I've enjoyed using a lot. I think I got it for free. I think there was a company that was doing a promotion, like an electronics company or a audio company that was doing a promotion where they were giving it away. But of course, you can buy it directly from Isotope or any of the other retailers that sell this kind of thing. And the last feature I want to show you is something that I just learned like yesterday. I've been thinking, surely there's a way to have ReaFir save your project as you go along so that you don't lose your work if something happens. One time when I was recording an episode of the podcast, my computer, not the ReaFir software, but my computer just crapped out right in the middle of it. Like it was still running, but the screen went black. I couldn't make it do anything. And ultimately, I just lost really the whole interview that I'd recorded. We were probably, 30, 45 minutes into this interview. And I was using Skype. So, of course, I had the Skype recording to use as a backup. And I ended up having to use that as the primary audio, which was not ideal. And I was thinking, there's got to be some way that ReaFir can autosave itself as you go along. And it turns out there is. Like with everything, it seems like if you can dream it up, somebody else has already thought of it, and it's available in ReaFir. So if you go to Preferences, and you look for Backups right under Project there, you have this option to autosave, and it's turned off by default. I don't know why that is, but that is the case. So the way I've been doing it is choose autosave to timestamp file. When you turn it on, the default setting there is 50 copies. And I don't want 50 copies of my project floating around in those folders, of course. So I decided that 6 copies was fine. And then you can tell it how often you want it to save. So I did 10 minutes. So I figure, okay, I'll always have the last hour of things saved if I need to go back or whatever. And then you can tell it if you want it to autosave all the time when you're stopped or just when you're not recording. My primary goal is to get it to save while I'm recording. So I just turned it on and set it to any time. It's supposed to happen in the background so that it doesn't cause any disruption of what you're doing. It remains to be seen if that's the case. I haven't done any long interviews since I figured this out, so we'll see how that goes. And of course, you can play around with this and tell it to do whatever you want. So that's all I got. I hope those tips are as useful for you as they were for me. I always feel like I'm 100 years behind everybody else when I discover these things, but maybe there's some other people out there that are just learning about this stuff too. So if that's helpful, fantastic. Of course, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Thanks for watching.